My friend Matt had a small hunting cabin upstate. He bought it a few years ago with his cousin, mostly for deer season. It wasn't anything fancy, no running water, no electricity, no cell service. Just a simple wooden cabin surrounded by trees, sitting quiet in a patch of clearing. I'd never been up there before, but Matt said if I ever wanted to get away from the noise and people, I could use it anytime. I finally took him up on it one weekend in October. The drive took about 5 hours. Once I got off the highway, it was another hour down winding roads that got narrower and rougher the deeper into the woods I went. The last mile was basically just a trail of packed dirt, barely wide enough for my car. I pulled up in front of the cabin just as the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. It was peaceful, too quiet, even just the soft crunch of leaves under my boots and the occasional rustle of branches. The cabin itself was small. One room with a twin bed, a wood stove, a beat-up old recliner, and a little kitchenette area with some shelves and a propane burner. There was a closet with some spare blankets and a few hooks on the wall. Matt had left a note on the counter. "Feel free to use whatever's here. Firewood's stacked out back. Be careful with the stove. It smokes sometimes." I got a fire going in the stove and heated up a can of soup I brought. I read for a while, then turned in early. It was cold, even with the fire. The bed creaked every time I moved. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange sound. Scratching, scuffling. I lay there still, listening. It was coming from under the floor. I figured it was probably rats or some kind of animal. The cabin was old, and I didn't expect it to be sealed tight. I tried to ignore it and eventually fell back asleep. The next day, I went for a walk through the woods. There was a trail behind the cabin that led out to an old deer blind. I didn't go far, just enough to stretch my legs and kill some time. It was quiet. I didn't see a single other person, not even a hunter. That night, after dinner, I sat outside for a bit with a blanket and a flashlight, watching the stars. You don't get skies like that in the city. No light pollution, just endless black filled with stars. I went inside around 10 and locked the door behind me. Got the fire going again. I was halfway asleep when I heard it. Humming, faint and low. A slow, soft tune, like a lullaby, coming from under the floorboards. It didn't sound mechanical. It didn't sound like wind or the stove or any of the creaks the cabin normally made. It sounded human. I sat up slowly, held my breath. The humming went on for maybe 10 more seconds, then stopped. I waited in the silence. Nothing else. No footsteps. No movement. Just that heavy, thick silence that cabins in the woods always seem to have. There was a small hatch in the closet. Matt had told me about it once. It led to the crawl space under the cabin. He used it to check pipes or whatever in the winter. I hadn't looked at it since I got there. I got up, opened the closet, and crouched by the hatch. It was about 2 feet by 2 feet, made of a wooden panel with a simple metal handle. I pulled it open slowly. The smell hit me first. Musty, damp earth mixed with something stale. I turned on my phone flashlight and aimed it down into the darkness. The space was tight, barely 3 feet of clearance. Just dirt floor and wooden beams holding up the cabin. But near the far wall, I saw a pile of things. Torn blanket, a plastic bag with food wrappers, an empty water bottle, and a pillow. It looked like someone had been sleeping down there, maybe still was. I slammed the hatch shut and shoved a chair in front of it. Then I pushed the dresser from the wall and wedged it over the closet door. My heart was racing. I didn't hear anything else that night, but I didn't sleep much either. Every little sound outside felt louder. I kept staring at the front door. I took one of the kitchen chairs and wedged it under the handle, just in case. At some point, I dozed off in the bed, fully dressed, my boots still on. When I woke up, it was barely light outside, cold morning light filtering through the small window. I sat up, stretched, and froze. There was a piece of paper on the floor near the door, just a plain white note, folded once. I picked it up. My hands were shaking. The handwriting was messy, big, uneven letters. It said, "You heard me. Now you leave." No name, no threats, just that. I stood there for a long time, my brain trying to make sense of it. I kept thinking maybe someone had lived there before and didn't know Matt owned it now. Maybe someone homeless had been squatting there. Or maybe someone was using it as a hideout or shelter. Either way, the message was clear. They didn't want me there, and they weren't afraid to let me know they were still around. I didn't touch anything, didn't eat, didn't even change clothes. I packed my bag, grabbed my keys, and walked out without looking back. The woods felt different that morning. Not peaceful anymore, just off, like the trees were watching. I kept glancing behind me as I walked to the car. Every snap of a twig made me jump. When I got back on the road, I didn't stop until I hit the highway. Even then, I kept checking my mirrors. Part of me expected to see someone following, even though that made no sense. I didn't tell Matt everything, just said I heard weird noises and I didn't sleep well. He said, "Yeah, it's an old cabin. Takes getting used to." I didn't correct him. I haven't been back since. I don't plan to. Someone was living under that floor. Someone who'd been close enough to hear me. Close enough to slip a note under the door without making a sound. Maybe they'd been there long before Matt bought the place. Maybe they never left. But what really gets me, what still creeps me out when I try to sleep at night, is knowing I wasn't alone in that cabin. Not for a single minute. And I'll never know how long they were listening, or what would have happened if I hadn't left. I booked the cabin after the breakup because I just needed to get away from everyone. The fights, the silence, the dragging days afterward. It was all too much. I didn't want to stay in the city, see familiar places, or run into people asking me how I was doing. I found this listing online. An old cabin way out in the woods, in the middle of nowhere. No neighbors nearby, no traffic, barely even a road. The listing made it sound perfect for someone who wanted real alone time. I paid for 4 nights. Took me almost half a day to get there. Paved roads turned into gravel, then narrowed into a snow-covered track that curved through thick trees. I had to park my car at a small pull-off and carry my bag the last few hundred feet. The cabin was simple wooden walls, a small porch, one main room with a fireplace, a kitchenette, and a door leading to a bedroom. The place looked clean enough, stocked with firewood, and the power worked, which was all I really needed. No phone service, no internet, just trees and snow and quiet. The first night was uneventful. I drank tea by the fire, scrolled through some old photos on my phone, and tried not to think too much. I went to bed early, and despite the wind blowing against the walls and the creaking sounds from the roof, I actually slept okay. The next day, I stayed in for most of it. I read a bit, wrote in a notebook, cooked some eggs. Around late afternoon, I took a short walk behind the cabin. There was a faint trail that led deeper into the woods, and I followed it just a little, enough to get my blood moving. That's when I noticed the other cabin. It was maybe 200 yards away, partly hidden behind a row of pine trees. The owner had mentioned it during our brief exchange. Nearest place is another cabin a few hundred feet off. Empty, nothing to worry about, so I didn't think much of it. It looked old too, same style as mine. No smoke from the chimney, no tire tracks or footprints leading to it. I figured maybe someone had lived there years ago. But later that night, around 9, I saw lights through the trees. I was outside on the porch. I had just finished a bowl of soup and stepped out to get some fresh air. The sky was dark, and the snow on the ground reflected a little bit of the moonlight. Through the trees, I caught a flash of movement. At first, I thought it was the wind pushing a branch, but then I saw a light flick on in the window of that other cabin. Startled me, honestly. I stood there for a while, squinting. I thought maybe the owner was wrong. Maybe someone else had rented it and just showed up late. Or maybe the owner came out here from time to time and hadn't told me. I wasn't sure. Still, I didn't feel too worried. I went back inside, locked the door, and kept to myself. The next morning, the snow had stopped falling, and the sky was clear. I kept looking out the window at the trees, toward where I saw the light the night before. I thought I'd see smoke from the chimney, or someone walking around, but nothing moved. No footprints, no sounds. Around noon, I finally decided to walk over and check it out. Not to bother anyone, just to see if maybe there was a car, or some sign that someone was staying there. The walk took a little longer than I expected. The snow was deep in some places, and the land sloped a bit downward the closer I got. When I reached the cabin, I noticed how dead everything looked. No tire tracks, no footprints except the ones I was making. I knocked lightly on the door. No answer. I walked around the side and peered through one of the windows. It was dusty, the kind of dust that builds up over years. Cobwebs hung from the corners. Furniture covered in sheets. I could see a small table inside, a coat rack, and a broken lantern hanging by the window. It didn't look lived in. It didn't even look like anyone had stepped inside for a long time. I checked the back, but it was the same story. I stood there for a while, not really sure what to make of it. I'd definitely seen a light turn on last night. I saw movement, but now it looked like this place hadn't had power in years. I made my way back to my cabin, trying to explain it to myself. Maybe I saw a reflection, maybe a hunter or a squatter stayed there for the night and left early. Maybe my eyes played tricks on me in the dark. I tried not to dwell on it. I had come here to get away, not to get spooked by weird little things in the woods. When I got back to my cabin, I climbed the porch steps and stopped cold. There was a piece of paper folded in half and placed carefully right in front of the door. I picked it up. It wasn't wet, despite the snow. No footprints leading up to it, no marks in the snow nearby. Just that note. In plain handwriting, it said, "Please don't come back to my cabin. I'm trying to stay hidden." That was it. No name, no explanation, just those words. I stood there for a long time holding the paper. My hands started to go numb from the cold, but I barely noticed. I kept looking around me at the trees, at the snow. There was no sign of anyone, nothing but my own footprints. I didn't understand how someone could have left it there without leaving any trace. I went inside and locked the door. My heart was pounding harder now, and every creak of the cabin made me jump. I sat down, trying to think things through. The only logical explanation I could come up with was that someone was staying in that cabin, off the grid, maybe illegally. Maybe they saw me snooping around and got scared I'd report them or come back. But even then, no footprints, no sound? How did they get so close without me hearing? That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept the fire going, but I turned off all the lights. I sat in the chair by the window with a blanket over me, just watching. I thought I heard something once or twice. A crunch outside, a distant snap of a branch, but when I looked, I saw nothing. The woods stayed still. No more lights from the other cabin. No more notes. By morning, I had made my decision. I packed everything, cleaned the cabin the best I could, and left a day early. I didn't care about losing the money for the last night. I didn't even message the owner. I just didn't want to be there anymore. On the hike back to my car, I kept turning around, checking the trees behind me. Nothing ever moved, but the feeling stayed. Like I wasn't really alone. Like someone had been watching me from the moment I got too close. Even now, I don't fully understand what happened. There was no big moment, no danger I could prove. Just that one strange light, an empty cabin that looked like a ghost of a home, and a note from someone who clearly didn't want to be found. I don't talk about it much. I don't think anyone would believe it, and honestly, it sounds small when I say it out loud. But that feeling, that tight, crawling feeling in your gut when something isn't right, I've never shaken that off. I don't go to cabins anymore. I don't rent places in the woods. Once was enough. I own a small cabin deep in the woods of northern Washington. Bought it a few years back with the idea that I'd fix it up and use it as a weekend escape. But life got in the way. I only stayed there maybe twice in the first year. After that, it just sat there, untouched, quiet, collecting dust and cobwebs while I worked my job back in the city. It was too remote, too cold in the winter, and too much of a hassle most of the time. Still, I kept the place. Part of me didn't want to let it go. Late last summer, I decided to go camping nearby. I didn't feel like sleeping inside the cabin. I wanted to rough it a little. I parked my truck about a mile away from the gravel road and hiked into the woods. Found a nice little flat area about 30 yards from the cabin. Set up my tent, built a small fire pit, and settled in. The weather was decent, cool nights, warm days. It was peaceful, just the sound of wind in the trees and the occasional rustling from deer or squirrels. I brought along a trail camera I'd been meaning to use for a while, one of those motion-activated ones with night vision. I strapped it to a tree facing the front of the cabin, mostly out of curiosity. I thought it would be fun to see what kind of animals came by at night. Maybe catch a bear or a raccoon sniffing around. I made sure it was set to record short clips whenever it picked up movement, then forgot about it. That night, I cooked some beans on my little camp stove, had a beer, and climbed into my tent around 11. It was quiet, so quiet it almost rang in your ears. The cabin was in view from my tent if I leaned out far enough, but I kept the flaps shut. I had no reason to think about it. I hadn't been inside yet, hadn't even unlocked the place. I planned to go in the next morning and maybe sweep out the dust, see if any mice had moved in. I slept okay. Not great. The kind of sleep where you wake up every few hours for no reason. I remember waking up sometime in the early morning, maybe around 3 a.m. It was still dark. I didn't hear anything unusual. No footsteps, no twigs snapping. But I had that weird feeling, like something was watching. I chalked it up to the woods playing tricks on my brain and went back to sleep. Next morning, I woke up with the sun. It was a little after 7. I stretched, made some instant coffee, and sat on a log sipping it. I could see the cabin through the trees, still looked the same. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows. The front door was shut. Everything seemed normal. Eventually, I remembered the trail cam. I walked over to it and popped out the SD card. Brought it back to my truck where I had my laptop. It took a while to boot everything up and load the files, but once I did, I clicked through a bunch of clips. A deer wandered past around 11:30. A rabbit hopped by just after midnight. A raccoon sniffed around the porch at 1:40 a.m. Then, at 2:46 a.m., I opened a clip and just froze. There was a man standing in front of the cabin door, just standing there. He wasn't holding a flashlight. He didn't have a backpack. He wasn't moving much. His arms hung at his sides, and his head was tilted slightly, like he was looking right at the doorframe. He stood there for maybe 15 minutes. The camera didn't record the whole time. It did short bursts whenever it detected motion, but he didn't leave right away. The next clip was from around 3:01, and it showed him walking off toward the woods. I sat there in my truck, just staring at the laptop. My first thought was that it was some lost hiker, or maybe a local who wandered in by mistake. But the area wasn't near any trail. It wasn't easy to find unless you knew exactly where it was. Still, I tried to be logical. Maybe someone just stumbled upon it and left. But then I noticed something. When the man first appeared, he didn't walk in from the woods like the other animals. He didn't come from the left or the right. The first frame that caught him showed him stepping out from inside the cabin. The camera had a clear view of the door, and I could see the moment it slowly opened. He walked out, turned, and stood there. That's what chilled me the most. I hadn't gone inside the cabin yet. I was asleep in my tent when that clip was recorded. I felt my throat go dry. My hands were cold, even though it was a warm morning. I played the clip again and again, trying to see if I'd missed something. His face wasn't clear. The night vision made everything look washed out in that green tint. But he wasn't wearing any kind of uniform or gear, just jeans and what looked like a flannel shirt. He wasn't carrying anything, no bag, no flashlight. He just stood there. I grabbed my knife from the glove box. Not much, but it felt better than nothing. I walked slowly back toward the cabin. My heart was pounding the whole time. I stepped quietly, listening for any movement, but all I heard were birds and wind. When I reached the cabin, I checked the door. Still closed. I turned the knob slowly. It was locked. I dug into my backpack for the key and unlocked the door. Creaked open. The air inside smelled old, like wood and dust and maybe something faintly sour. The place was exactly how I left it the last time. A small wooden table, 2 chairs, an old couch, some shelves with canned food. A broom leaning in the corner. Nothing looked touched, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. I walked through the place, checking every corner. The bathroom was empty. Closet was empty. The attic hatch hadn't been disturbed. I opened every drawer, checked under the couch, even looked in the cabinets. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no muddy footprints, no trash left behind. Whoever it was, if they had come from inside, they'd left no trace. I checked the windows. All were shut from the inside. I walked the perimeter. No signs of anyone trying to break in. No boot prints, just dry needles and leaves. I even checked the back door. Still locked. The only explanation that made any sense was that someone had been hiding inside before I arrived. Maybe days before, maybe longer. They could have slipped in sometime during the last year and found a way to stay hidden. Maybe they heard me coming and waited. Maybe they'd been living there for a while. I packed up my tent and gear as fast as I could. I didn't feel safe anymore, not knowing who had been inside or what they wanted. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone to appear from behind a tree. But no one did. The woods stayed quiet. Before I left, I erased the SD card. I didn't want that clip sitting there. I didn't want to look at it again. I locked the cabin, double-checked all the windows, then drove straight back to the city. That was nearly 6 months ago. I haven't been back since. I changed the locks, installed heavy-duty bars across the doors, and screwed shut all the windows. Part of me wants to sell the place, but I can't bring myself to list it yet. I keep thinking about how he got in, how he left no signs, how he stood there like he belonged there. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear footsteps, or a door creaking open. I check all the locks in my apartment just to be sure. I haven't gone camping again either. I don't know who he was. I don't know how long he was in there, but I do know this: he didn't come from the woods. He came from inside, and I was asleep just a few yards away when it happened. I rented a small off-grid cabin deep in the woods of West Virginia for a long weekend. I'd found it on a site that specialized in secluded stays. No neighbors, no Wi-Fi, no reception unless you hike to higher ground. That was exactly what I wanted. I'd been burnt out from work, mentally drained, and just needed to disconnect. The cabin was basic: wood walls, tin roof, no electricity, just a gas lamp and a small wood stove. It had a single bed, a small kitchenette, and an outhouse about 20 feet out back. I brought food in a cooler, some instant coffee, a couple books, and figured I'd spend the weekend hiking and reading and doing absolutely nothing else. On my second day there, mid-afternoon, I went out for a hike along one of the trails that started behind the cabin and cut through the trees. It wasn't marked, but I had downloaded an offline map before I got there. I'd been walking maybe an hour when I saw someone ahead of me coming from the opposite direction. I slowed down. It was a woman. She looked like she'd been out there a long time. Her clothes were dirty, jeans stained with mud, a faded hoodie that looked too big for her. Her hair was tangled, clumped like it hadn't been brushed in days. Her face looked pale, but it was hard to tell. At first I assumed she might have been a lost hiker or someone staying at another cabin nearby. But as she got closer, something about her just seemed off. She stopped a few feet from me. No smile, no greeting. She just stood there, looking at me. I stopped too and said something about the weather. I don't even remember what exactly, just trying to be polite. She didn't answer, just kept looking at me, then finally asked if she could use my phone. Her voice was quiet, flat. I told her there wasn't any service out here, which was true. She nodded slowly, then asked if she could come back with me to my cabin to wash up. That's when my stomach sank a little. The way she said it didn't sound like someone in trouble. There was no urgency, no panic, no explanation. Just a quiet request to come back with me. I told her no, said I didn't feel comfortable with that. She didn't react, didn't argue, just stared at me for a while, maybe 10, 15 seconds. Then she turned and walked off the trail into the trees. Not in the direction she came from, just off to the side. A second later, she started running. Not fast, not panicked, just running like she knew exactly where she was going. I stood there for a minute trying to process it. I looked around, listened, but she was already gone. No footsteps, no snapping branches, just quiet. I kept hiking for a bit, but I couldn't shake the weird feeling. I cut my hike short and headed back to the cabin. By the time I got back, the sun was getting low. I made some food, sat out on the small front porch with a book, and tried to put it out of my mind. Maybe she was just lost. Maybe she lived nearby. I told myself not to overthink it, but I kept checking over my shoulder, looking out into the trees. That night, I locked the cabin door. Not that it would do much. It was just a simple latch. There were no curtains on the windows. I had the gas lamp lit and was lying in bed, listening to the woods, the bugs, the occasional owl, the wind. I was finally starting to relax when I heard it. A soft tapping sound. Not loud, not frantic. Just a single tap. Then another. I sat up, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like it was from the window beside the kitchen. I stayed still for a minute, heart starting to race. Then I got up slowly and turned the lamp down low. I didn't go to the window. I didn't want to be silhouetted. Didn't want to move around too much. I just waited. After a few minutes, it stopped. I stood there, frozen, for a long time. Eventually, I got back into bed. But I didn't sleep much. Every time I'd start to drift off, I'd hear it again. Another tap. Always just one or two at a time. Not the same window. Different ones. One by the front door. Then hours later, one by the back wall. Always spaced out, always just enough to keep me on edge. I didn't have a gun. Just a small camping knife I used to open cans. I kept it beside me in bed, hand on the handle. I didn't move until the sky started to lighten. As soon as it was bright enough to see, I packed everything. Didn't eat, didn't make coffee, just threw my stuff in my bag and left. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole hike back to where my car was parked, about a mile down a dirt path. There were no cars, no people. Nothing looked disturbed. I got in and drove straight out of there. I never reported it. I wouldn't have even known what to say. I didn't see a crime, didn't know her name, didn't even know if she needed help or if she was trying to do something worse. But something about the way she stared at me, then ran into the woods, and the tapping that came every hour after that, it felt planned. Like she knew I'd be alone, knew how far I was from anyone else. Like she wasn't just wandering around by accident. I don't know if she came back with someone. I didn't see anyone else. But I also didn't sleep that night, and I kept listening for footsteps that never came. Just taps. Careful, patient taps. I never went back to that cabin. Canceled my last night and didn't ask for a refund. I left a short review. Secluded, peaceful. A little too quiet for me. Nothing else. No details. Sometimes I wonder how far she followed me. If she stood in the trees after I left, watching again. If she ever knocked on someone else's window. Or maybe she's still out there, walking those same trails, waiting for the next person to say yes. I rented a small cabin deep in the woods of Oregon to get away from everything and finally finish writing my thesis. I was behind, distracted, and needed a place where no one could bother me. I didn't want Wi-Fi, I didn't want neighbors, I didn't even want phone service. I just wanted quiet, and this cabin had it. It was listed as off-grid, rustic, peaceful, and that's exactly what it was. A narrow dirt road curved up into the woods for what felt like miles before the trees opened to a clearing with this lonely, weathered cabin sitting in the middle. It looked old but solid, made of real timber logs, with a small porch, a metal chimney, and windows that looked out into pure forest in every direction. No other houses, no power lines, no cars. Just trees and silence. Inside, it was simple. One main room with a small table, a wood stove, a basic kitchen with a propane burner, and a twin-sized bed pushed into a corner. The bathroom was just an outhouse about 10 steps behind the cabin. The only part of the structure I didn't explore right away was the attic. There was a wooden ladder bolted into one of the walls, leading up to a hatch in the ceiling. I figured it was probably for storage, or maybe just an empty crawl space. I didn't care much about it. I wasn't there to explore, I was there to work. The first day went by quietly. I unpacked my notebooks, my laptop, and a stack of old reference books. I didn't have internet, but I had everything downloaded and backed up. I wrote for hours, interrupted only by the sound of birds and the occasional rustle in the trees. I kept the door open during the day to let in the fresh air and light. At night, I used a lantern. The darkness out there was so heavy it felt like the forest swallowed the cabin whole. Once the sun went down, there was nothing but black. No streetlights, no moonlight through curtains, just pitch dark. That night, I made some soup, read through some of my notes, and went to bed around midnight. I didn't sleep great, just adjusting to the quiet, I guess. But nothing strange happened. It wasn't until the second night that things shifted. I had been working most of the day and made good progress. I boiled some water for instant coffee in the evening, ate some canned beans and crackers, and sat at the table going through what I'd written. Around 10 p.m., I heard a dull thud above me. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, like something had fallen. I froze and looked up. The sound came from the attic. I stared at the ceiling for a while. I wasn't scared exactly, but it did make me uneasy. I told myself it was probably a squirrel or a bird that had found a way in through a gap in the roof. It's an old cabin, these things happen. Still, I couldn't shake it. I kept glancing at the ladder leading up to the attic hatch. Finally, around midnight, after hearing another softer creak, I gave in to curiosity and climbed up. The ladder groaned under my weight. When I pushed the hatch open, the air that came down smelled like dry wood, dust, and something faintly sour. I pulled myself up slowly and shined my flashlight around. The attic was low-ceilinged, just tall enough to crouch in, with wooden beams running across the top. There were a few old boxes, a rolled-up rug, and a blanket tossed in the corner. It looked undisturbed for years. I was about to climb back down when I noticed something under the blanket. A small wooden lockbox, maybe the size of a shoebox. It wasn't locked. The latch was loose. I opened it, thinking maybe I'd find some old letters or tools. What I found were photographs. Dozens of Polaroids stacked neatly. I picked up the top few. People, always inside this same cabin. Different faces. Men, women, even a few children. Some were sitting at the table. Some standing by the wood stove. Some were lying in the bed, sleeping. It was like someone had been documenting the people who stayed here, but in a way that felt wrong. I went through more of them. Some were blurry, some clearer. In one, a man with a beard was eating soup at the same table I had used. Another showed a woman brushing her hair near the window. Then I found one taken from outside the cabin, through the front window. You could see a man inside sitting alone, writing. That's when I started feeling cold. I flipped through more, faster now. My hands were shaking. Then I saw a photo of myself, sitting at the dining table, wearing the same hoodie I had worn the night before, the same cup of coffee on the table, the same notes spread out. The photo had been taken from inside the cabin. I just sat there for a moment, staring at it, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't seen anyone. No one could have taken it without me hearing them. But there it was, me sitting right there, completely unaware. It wasn't an old picture either. It looked recent, last night. I don't know what switched in me at that moment, but something did. My body felt hollow. My breath got short. I suddenly felt like I wasn't alone, like someone had been here, maybe still was. I dropped the photos back in the box, closed it, and started backing toward the hatch. I climbed down fast and grabbed my backpack. I didn't bother folding anything or packing properly. I just shoved everything in: laptop, charger, books, flashlight. I took one last look around and bolted out the door. The cold night air hit me like ice. I ran to my car, which was parked under the trees near the front steps. Getting the keys out felt like it took forever. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped them once. I kept looking around, expecting someone to come walking out of the woods, but no one did. I finally got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I reversed down that narrow dirt road, I kept checking the mirrors. Nothing behind me, no one in the trees. But that didn't calm me, because whoever took those photos wasn't just passing by. They had been in the cabin, maybe even in the attic, maybe even the night I was asleep. It took almost 40 minutes of slow, winding driving to get back to the nearest road with a signal. Once I had bars, I pulled over and sat there, catching my breath. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? There was no crime, just fear. Evidence, maybe, but nothing definite. And I was safe. That's what mattered. I found a motel that night about an hour away and stayed there. The next morning, I booked a flight home. I didn't even go back for the rest of my stuff. Left it all there. I didn't tell anyone at first. I just tried to forget, but I couldn't. I kept wondering how many others had stayed there. How many knew about those photos? How many never found them? Sometimes I think about that attic, that box, the people in those photos. Were they all like me? Just trying to get away? Find some peace? Did they all leave in the middle of the night, scared out of their minds? Or did something worse happen to some of them? And whoever took that photo of me, they were close. Close enough to reach me if they wanted to. But they didn't. They just watched. And that somehow made it worse. I still don't know who they were. I probably never will. But I'll never go back to that cabin. Not for anything. I rented a cabin in the mountains for a quiet week away from everything. It was deep in the woods, far from town. Exactly what I needed. The place was old, mostly wooden, but solid. It had a stone fireplace that looked like it had been there for 100 years. Big, heavy stones stacked perfectly, blackened from decades of smoke. The owner told me the cabin didn't get much use anymore. He mostly kept it for sentimental reasons, said his grandfather had built it. I didn't mind the isolation. I just wanted some quiet time to myself, away from people, phones, everything. The first night was fine, cold but peaceful. I made a small fire in the fireplace, read for a bit, then went to bed early. The wind howled a little through the trees outside, and the old wooden walls creaked here and there, but nothing that bothered me. I fell asleep without any issues. It was the second night when things got strange. I was sitting on the couch, reading again, the fire burning low. Around 11, I started hearing something, faint. I thought maybe it was the wind again, but this was different. It sounded like voices, not loud or clear, more like whispers, coming from the direction of the fireplace. I paused and listened closely. The sound was low, but steady. At first I thought maybe the wind was whistling through a crack in the chimney, playing tricks on my ears. But then I heard it again, words, actual words, whispers but distinct. One voice said, "He's still here." Then another, slightly deeper voice answered, "Wait until he sleeps." I froze. I sat perfectly still for maybe a full minute. The fire crackled quietly. I didn't hear anything else. I stood up slowly, walked to the fireplace, and knelt down in front of it. My heart was pounding hard. I leaned in, not too close, and listened again. Silence, just the low popping of burning wood. Then, faint, almost like they were buried deep in the chimney, I heard the whispers again, like two people talking, but trying not to be heard. I stood up, backed away, and turned all the lights on. I checked the front door, still locked. Same with the back. I even checked all the windows one by one. Nothing broken. Everything was shut tight. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of the living room with the biggest kitchen knife I had, the fireplace in full view. I didn't turn the fire off. I wanted the light. I stayed up like that all night, watching, listening. I heard the whispers 2 more times. Each time just a few words. Never loud, never urgent. Calm, like they had time, like they were just waiting. When the sun finally came up, I opened the front door and stepped outside. The morning air was cold and damp, and there was a light fog clinging to the trees. I stood there for a while, just breathing, trying to convince myself it was all in my head. But then I walked around to the back of the cabin. There were boot prints in the dirt, coming from the woods. I could see them clearly, deep, fresh, leading directly to the back wall of the cabin, right where the chimney connected. But there were no boot prints going back, no prints leaving. I followed them up to the stones. The ground was still soft from rain the day before, and the impressions were clear. Someone had walked out of the woods, straight to the back of the chimney. And then, nothing. No dragging, no turning, no stepping away. Just a dead stop. I walked back inside, locking both doors behind me. I didn't bother with breakfast. I packed up my stuff in under 10 minutes. I didn't even take a second look at anything. I just needed to get out. Before I left, I went back to the fireplace one last time. It was still dark inside, the ashes from the night before still warm. I picked up the fire poker and tapped the back wall gently, then harder. It sounded solid. I reached inside and ran my hand along the inner wall. Nothing unusual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. Not inside the cabin, inside the chimney. On my way out, I called the owner, told him something strange had happened, that I was cutting my trip short. I didn't go into details. He didn't seem too surprised, just said he understood and that the place gave people weird feelings sometimes. That was all. The road back down the mountain felt longer than I remembered. Every sound in the trees made me jump. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. But nothing, just miles of quiet road and thick woods. When I finally made it home, I took a long shower, ate, and tried to sleep. But the whispers stuck with me. The way they spoke like they already knew I was listening. Calm, patient, not threatening, just waiting. A few days later, I couldn't help myself. I looked up the area, the cabin, anything I could find. The place didn't have much of a history online, but I did find a single old post on a local forum from about 5 years ago. A guy had stayed in that same area, might have been the same cabin, but he didn't name it. He talked about hearing something inside the walls. Thought it was rats at first until he heard someone say his name. He never went back. I never got a clear answer about the boot prints. I never figured out how anyone could have gotten inside the chimney or how they could whisper like that without being seen or heard anywhere else. But I know what I heard, and I know what I saw out back. Those prints came from someone real, someone who walked to the chimney and didn't leave. I've stayed in cabins before and after, but I've never touched another fireplace. I won't, because sometimes the scariest things don't need to jump out at you. They don't need to chase you. They just need to wait, quietly, just behind the stone, watching, listening, waiting for you to sleep. We arrived at the cabin later than we'd planned, closer to midnight. The road was winding, pitch black, and surrounded by trees that pressed in on both sides like walls. My girlfriend was asleep most of the way, her head leaning against the window. I was tired too, eyes burning from the long drive. We'd rented the place for a quiet weekend away from the city, somewhere deep in the woods, no neighbors, no traffic, just stillness. I was looking forward to that kind of silence. When we finally pulled up, the cabin looked exactly like the pictures. Wooden, one story, a porch with 2 old chairs, and a rusted barbecue grill off to the side. The outside light wasn't on, but I didn't think much of it. I parked in the small clearing near the front steps and left the headlights on to see what I was doing. That's when I noticed the front door wasn't shut all the way. I thought maybe the cleaner or the person before us had forgotten to close it properly. It was cracked open just enough to catch my eye. I left the car running, told my girlfriend to stay inside, and walked up the steps. The door creaked when I pushed it open, and the first thing I noticed was how cold it was inside. Not freezing, but colder than you'd expect for a summer night. All the lights were off. I flicked the switch by the door and the living room light came on. Everything looked neat. Couch, small kitchen area in the back, a hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. No signs of anyone else being there. No bags, no shoes, nothing. I called out a soft hello just in case. Nothing. I walked through the cabin, checked the back door, the windows, even the little closet near the bathroom. Everything looked fine. Still, I had that tight feeling in my chest. Something didn't sit right, but I told myself I was just being paranoid. The door probably bounced open after the cleaner left. It happens. I went back out, gave my girlfriend the okay, and we carried our bags in. She was half asleep and didn't notice anything off. We didn't talk much, just brushed our teeth and crawled into bed. The bedroom was small but cozy. There was a window above the bed that looked out into the woods. I tried not to think too hard about the door or the weird feeling. We were tired. I just wanted sleep. But around 2 a.m., I woke up thirsty. My throat was dry, and I figured I'd just grab a glass of water from the kitchen. I didn't turn on the bedroom light. I didn't want to wake her. So I walked out into the hallway in the dark, using the faint moonlight through the windows to see. As I passed the kitchen, I stopped. The basement door was wide open. I froze. It was just past the fridge. This old wooden door I hadn't even noticed earlier. Now it was open all the way, revealing a steep, dark staircase leading down. No light from below, just black. I stood there for a good 30 seconds. My heart started pounding. I didn't hear anything down there, no movement, no creaking. But I knew for a fact that neither of us had opened that door. I walked over slowly and shut it, gently, as quietly as I could. I didn't want it to slam. I didn't want to make noise. My hand was shaking when I touched the doorknob. I got my water, went back to bed, and didn't say anything. In the morning, we woke up late. Sunlight filled the room, and for a brief moment, everything felt normal. We had some instant coffee, ate a couple of granola bars, and talked about going for a walk later. I didn't bring up the door yet. I wanted to check it again myself first, to see if it was still closed. It wasn't. When I walked into the kitchen, I saw the door to the basement standing wide open again. This time, I stopped in my tracks and stared. My girlfriend came in behind me and asked, "Did you open that?" I shook my head. No. She frowned, walked over, leaned down a little, trying to look into the dark. "Is there a light?" I didn't answer. I just stood there. Then I did something I still regret. I yelled down, just one word, "Hello." For a second, there was nothing. No sound, just the hum of the fridge behind us. Then came a voice from below. A man's voice, not shouting, not panicked. Calm, almost curious. He said, "Is it time yet?" My girlfriend grabbed my arm hard. I slammed the door and locked it. There was a sliding bolt on the top. I pushed a chair in front of it too without thinking. We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking. That voice hadn't been distant either. It wasn't muffled like it was coming from the far end of the basement. It sounded close, like whoever it was standing just a few steps down. We didn't pack. We didn't check anything. I grabbed the car keys off the counter, and we rushed out the front door. I don't even remember if I locked it behind me. The second I started the engine, I hit reverse too fast and scraped the back of the car against a tree on the edge of the driveway. I didn't care. We drove for 30 minutes before we spoke. We ended up at a gas station just off the highway. We sat in the car for a while before deciding to book a motel for the night. My girlfriend kept asking me if maybe it was just some squatter. Maybe someone had broken in after the last guest. Maybe the cabin company didn't check it properly. Maybe. But what I kept thinking about was the way the voice sounded. Not surprised, not scared. It didn't say, "Who's there?" or "help," or even "sorry." Just those words. "Is it time yet?" Like we were late for something, like we were expected. I called the rental company the next day and told them what happened. I didn't say everything, just that we heard someone in the basement and left. The woman I spoke to sounded confused. She said we were the first renters in over a month. The place had been empty for weeks. She promised to send someone to check the cabin right away. We never heard back. No follow-up, no explanation. I didn't push it. We just let it go. We never talked about going back, and we never did. I don't even remember the name of the road it was on anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that voice. Calm, close, waiting. And I wonder what would have happened if I had walked down those stairs.